Imagine America in the aftermath of World War I. The nation had emerged from the global conflict with a newfound sense of power and optimism, but also a deep yearning for normalcy after years of sacrifice and upheaval. The 1920s, a decade often dubbed the Roaring Twenties, would be anything but normal. It was a period of dramatic social and cultural transformation, a break from Victorian traditions, and the birth of a distinctly modern American identity. The war had accelerated technological advancements, and the 1920s witnessed their widespread adoption. Imagine the increasing affordability of automobiles, making personal transportation accessible to a growing middle class and transforming the American landscape and social habits. The radio brought news, entertainment, and a shared national experience into millions of homes. Electricity illuminated cities and powered new appliances, changing the way people lived and worked. Economically, the early 1920s saw a post-war recession, but the latter half of the decade was marked by unprecedented prosperity. Imagine a booming stock market, fueled by speculation and a sense of endless growth. New industries flourished, mass production techniques made consumer goods more affordable, and advertising began to shape desires and lifestyles. This economic optimism contributed to a sense of liberation and a willingness to embrace new forms of entertainment and leisure. However, this prosperity was not evenly distributed, and the decade was also marked by social tensions. Imagine the lingering effects of racial segregation and discrimination, the anxieties surrounding immigration, and the cultural clashes between rural traditionalism and urban modernity. These undercurrents would play a significant role in shaping the era. One of the most defining aspects of the Roaring Twenties was a spirit of rebellion against the strict social and moral codes of the past. Imagine young people, particularly women, challenging Victorian norms of behavior and appearance. Shorter hemlines, bobbed hairstyles, and a more assertive attitude became symbols of this newfound freedom. The rise of the flapper, a young woman characterized by her energetic dancing, independent spirit, and rejection of traditional feminine roles, captured the essence of this social shift. This rebellion was also evident in the changing social landscape. Imagine the growth of urban centers as people migrated from rural areas seeking economic opportunities and a more modern way of life. Cities became melting pots of cultures and ideas, fostering innovation and challenging traditional values. The passage of Prohibition in 1920, outlawing the manufacture and sale of alcohol, had an unintended and dramatic impact on American culture. Imagine the rise of speakeasies, illegal bars, and the growth of organized crime as people sought to circumvent the law. Prohibition fueled a culture of secrecy and defiance, contributing to the era's rebellious spirit. Against this backdrop of technological change, economic boom, and social upheaval, a new sound emerged that would define the decade: jazz. Imagine the vibrant and improvisational rhythms and melodies originating in African American communities in the South, particularly New Orleans, and spreading rapidly across the nation. Jazz became the soundtrack of the Roaring Twenties, a symbol of modernity, freedom, and a break with tradition. It was danced to in clubs, broadcast on the radio, and sparked both excitement and controversy. The Roaring Twenties were a period of profound transformation, a time when America embraced modernity, challenged old norms, and forged a new cultural identity. The energy and dynamism of this era, fueled by technological progress, economic growth, and a spirit of rebellion, continue to fascinate and influence our understanding of modern America. Imagine the airwaves crackling with the syncopated rhythms and improvisational melodies of jazz. Originating in African American communities in the American South, particularly New Orleans, jazz was a vibrant fusion of blues, ragtime, and European musical traditions. It wasn't just music, it was a cultural phenomenon that swept across the nation in the 1920s, becoming the defining sound of the era and earning it the moniker, the Jazz Age. The migration of African Americans from the rural South to the urban North during the Great Migration played a crucial role in the spread of jazz. Imagine musicians bringing their unique sounds and styles to cities like Chicago, New York, and Kansas City, where jazz flourished and evolved in new and exciting ways. Clubs and dance halls in these urban centers became hubs for jazz performance and social interaction. Imagine the raw energy and innovation of early jazz musicians like Louis Armstrong, with his distinctive trumpet playing and vocal style, and Duke Ellington, who brought a sophisticated orchestral approach to the genre. Their music, along with that of countless other talented artists, captivated audiences of all backgrounds, breaking down some social barriers. Although racial segregation still persisted, jazz was more than just something to listen to. It was music to move to. Imagine the birth of new and energetic dances that mirrored the rhythms and spirit of jazz. The Charleston, with its fast-paced kicks and swinging arms, became a symbol of the youthful exuberance and rebellious energy of the decade. The Lindy Hop, a more improvisational and athletic dance, also gained popularity, particularly in Harlem's vibrant nightlife scene. These dances were a departure from the more formal dances of the Victorian era, reflecting the looser social mores of the Roaring Twenties. The popularity of jazz sparked both excitement and controversy. Imagine older generations, clinging to traditional values, viewing jazz as immoral, chaotic, and a symbol of the era's perceived decline in social standards. They often associated it with speakeasies and the perceived loosening of sexual morality. However, for the younger generation, jazz represented modernity, freedom of expression, and a break from the constraints of the past. Jazz also played a significant role in the cultural exchange between Black and white America, although this exchange was often fraught with issues of appropriation and racial inequality. Imagine white musicians and composers drawing inspiration from Black jazz artists, sometimes achieving greater mainstream success, while the Black creators faced continued discrimination. The rise of the radio played a crucial role in popularizing jazz across the nation. Imagine families gathering around their radio sets to listen to live broadcasts of jazz performances from nightclubs in major cities. This shared listening experience helped to create a national audience for jazz and further cemented its place in American culture. The Jazz Age was a time of experimentation and innovation in music and dance, reflecting the broader social and cultural changes taking place in America. Imagine jazz as the soundtrack to a decade of rebellion, progress, and the forging of a new, more modern identity. It was a force that challenged old norms, celebrated individuality, and helped to bridge some cultural divides, even as others persisted. Imagine the dawn of the 1920s, bringing with it a palpable shift in the social landscape for women in America. The war had seen women take on new roles in the workforce, and the subsequent decade witnessed a growing sense of independence and a challenge to the rigid gender roles of the Victorian era. The emergence of the new woman symbolized this changing landscape, a woman who was more assertive, independent, and willing to break with tradition. One of the most visible symbols of the new woman was her changing appearance. Imagine women shedding the long restrictive dresses and elaborate hairstyles of the past in favor of shorter hemlines, looser silhouettes, and the fashionable bobbed haircut. This change in attire was more than just a trend. It represented a rejection of Victorian modesty and a desire for greater physical freedom and comfort. The new woman also embraced new forms of leisure and social activity. Imagine women driving automobiles, something largely unheard of in previous generations, granting them greater mobility and independence. They frequented dance halls, attended sporting events, and socialized in public spaces in ways that challenged traditional norms of female behavior. The image of the flapper, with her short skirts, bobbed hair, and enjoyment of jazz and dancing, became the iconic representation of this new social freedom, although it's important to remember that this image represented a specific segment of primarily young urban women. The 19th Amendment, granting women the right to vote in 1920, was a monumental achievement that significantly altered women's political standing. Imagine women exercising their newly won right, engaging in political discourse, and advocating for issues that concerned them. While the impact of women's suffrage was gradual and faced resistance, it marked a crucial step towards greater gender equality. Changes in the workforce also contributed to the rise of the new woman. Imagine more women entering white-collar jobs as secretaries, teachers, nurses, and shop assistants. While often facing lower pay and limited opportunities for advancement compared to men, this increased participation in the public sphere provided women with greater economic independence and a sense of purpose beyond the home. However, the shift towards greater gender equality was not without its limitations and contradictions. Imagine the persistence of traditional expectations regarding women's primary roles as wives and mothers. Many women still faced societal pressure to marry and prioritize domestic life. The ideal of the new woman often clashed with these deeply ingrained beliefs, creating tensions and debates about women's place in society. Furthermore, the freedoms and opportunities associated with the new woman were not equally accessible to all women. Imagine the experiences of African American women who faced the double burden of racism and sexism, limiting their access to education, employment, and social mobility. Working-class women, regardless of race, often continued to face harsh working conditions and limited opportunities for leisure and personal freedom. Despite these limitations, the 1920s marked a significant turning point for women in America. Imagine the seeds of modern feminism being sown as women challenged traditional gender roles, asserted their independence, and demanded greater participation in public life. The new woman, in her various forms, represented a cultural shift that would have a lasting impact on the trajectory of women's rights and social equality in the decades to come. Imagine Harlem, in the 1920s, a vibrant and dynamic neighborhood in New York City that became the epicenter of a cultural explosion known as the Harlem Renaissance. This period witnessed an unprecedented flourishing of African American art, literature, music, and intellectual thought, as black artists and thinkers asserted their cultural identity, challenged racial stereotypes, and celebrated their heritage. The Great Migration, which saw large numbers of African Americans move from the rural South to urban centers in the North, contributed significantly to the growth of Harlem and the conditions that fostered this artistic movement. Imagine this influx of talent and experience converging in one neighborhood, creating a fertile ground for creative expression. The Harlem Renaissance was driven by a desire among black intellectuals and artists to move beyond the minstrel stereotypes that had long dominated popular culture and to create authentic representations of black life and experience. Imagine writers like Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, and Claude McKay crafting powerful novels, poems, and essays that explored themes of racial identity, the complexities of urban life, and the rich cultural heritage of African Americans. Their work provided nuanced and multifaceted portrayals of black life, challenging the prevailing racist narratives. Visual artists also played a crucial role in the Harlem Renaissance. Imagine painters like Aaron Douglas and Jacob Lawrence creating powerful and evocative works that depicted black history, culture, and contemporary life, often incorporating modernist styles with African motifs. Sculptors like Augusta Savage also contributed significantly to the artistic landscape of the movement. Music, particularly jazz and blues, was an integral part of the Harlem Renaissance. Imagine the legendary nightclubs and music venues of Harlem, like the Cotton Club and the Apollo Theater, where jazz greats such as Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, and Bessie Smith captivated audiences, both black and white, though often in segregated settings. These musical forms provided a powerful voice for black expression and innovation. The Harlem Renaissance was not just an artistic movement, it was also a period of intense intellectual and political ferment. Imagine thinkers like Walway B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey engaging in debates about racial uplift, Pan-Africanism, and the future of black Americans. Journals and magazines like The Crisis published by the NAACP and Opportunity published by the National Urban League provided platforms for these intellectual discussions and showcased the literary and artistic talents of the movement. The movement also fostered a sense of racial pride and solidarity. Imagine black artists and intellectuals looking to their African heritage for inspiration and celebrating the richness and resilience of black culture in America. The Harlem Renaissance was an assertion of black humanity and a demand for recognition and equality in a racially segregated society. While the Harlem Renaissance was centered in New York City, its influence spread throughout the United States and beyond, inspiring future generations of black artists and activists. Imagine its lasting impact on American literature, art, and music, and its contribution to the ongoing struggle for civil rights and social justice. However, the Harlem Renaissance also faced challenges. Imagine the economic hardships of the Great Depression, eventually impacting the movement, and the persistent racism and segregation that limited opportunities for black artists and intellectuals. Despite these obstacles, the Harlem Renaissance remains a pivotal moment in American cultural history, a testament to the creative spirit and intellectual power of African Americans in the face of adversity. Imagine the Roaring Twenties as a period of exhilarating progress and innovation,
but also one marked by a significant clash of cultures within American society. The rapid social and cultural changes of the decade, the rise of urban life, new technologies, changing gender roles, and the influence of jazz, often stood in stark contrast to the more traditional values and beliefs held by many, particularly in rural areas and among older generations. For many Americans, the fast pace of the 1920s felt unsettling. Imagine the anxieties surrounding the perceived erosion of traditional morality, the breakdown of established social hierarchies, and the influence of what they saw as immoral urban culture. The flapper, with her rebellious attitude and modern appearance, became a lightning rod for these anxieties, symbolizing a perceived decline in feminine virtue. The issue of prohibition vividly illustrated this cultural divide. Imagine the fervent support for the ban on alcohol from those who believed it would promote morality and social order, often rooted in religious and rural traditions. Conversely, the widespread flouting of prohibition in urban speakeasies represented a rejection of these traditional values by a segment of society embracing modernity and personal freedom. The illegal alcohol trade also fueled organized crime, further contributing to the sense of social breakdown for traditionalists. Religious fundamentalism experienced a resurgence during the 1920s, fueled by anxieties about the changing social landscape and a desire to reaffirm traditional religious beliefs against the perceived threats of modern science and secularism. Imagine the Scopes trial of 1925 in Tennessee, a highly publicized legal battle over the teaching of evolution in public schools. This trial became a symbolic showdown between traditional religious interpretations of creation and modern scientific understanding, highlighting the deep cultural divide. Immigration also became a major point of cultural conflict. Imagine the influx of immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe in the early 20th century, leading to nativist sentiments and fears about the dilution of traditional American, often defined as white, Anglo-Saxon Protestant culture. The passage of restrictive immigration laws in the 1920s reflected these anxieties and a desire to preserve a perceived cultural homogeneity. The rise of mass media, particularly radio and cinema, also contributed to the cultural clash. Imagine the rapid spread of new forms of entertainment and ideas, which could challenge traditional values and introduce new ways of thinking and behaving, particularly to younger generations. Movies, with their depictions of modern life and changing social mores, were often viewed with suspicion by those clinging to traditional standards. Urban versus rural life became a significant marker of this cultural divide. Imagine the bustling, diverse and rapidly changing cities representing modernity, innovation, and a break from tradition, while rural areas were often seen as the keepers of traditional American values, community, and a slower pace of life. This geographical divide often mirrored the broader cultural tensions of the decade. The literature of the era also reflected this clash. Imagine writers like F. Scott Fitzgerald exploring the disillusionment and moral ambiguity of the Jazz Age, while others looked back to more traditional values or focused on the struggles of rural communities. In essence, the Roaring Twenties was not a monolithic era of carefree progress. It was a time of significant cultural tension, as a rapidly modernizing America grappled with the challenges and anxieties that came with the erosion of long-held traditions. This clash between traditionalism and modernity shaped many of the social, political, and cultural debates of the decade and left a lasting impact on the development of American society. Imagine the giddy optimism and seemingly endless prosperity of the late 1920s suddenly shattering. The stock market crash of October 1929, often referred to as Black Tuesday, marked a dramatic turning point, bringing the Roaring Twenties to an abrupt and devastating end, and ushering in the era of the Great Depression. For years, the stock market had been on a seemingly unstoppable rise, fueled by speculation and easy credit. Imagine ordinary Americans investing their savings in the market, believing in a future of endless growth. However, this bubble of speculation was unsustainable. In late October 1929, stock prices began to plummet, triggering a wave of panic selling. Imagine the chaos on Wall Street as investors desperately tried to unload their shares, leading to a catastrophic collapse in market value. Fortunes were wiped out overnight, and the widespread financial ruin had a profound impact on the American economy. Banks failed, businesses closed, and unemployment soared. The crash exposed the underlying economic weaknesses that had been masked by the superficial prosperity of the late 20s. Imagine the overproduction of goods, the unequal distribution of wealth, and the risky lending practices that contributed to the economic instability. The stock market crash was not just a financial event, it was a symptom of deeper structural problems. The exuberance and carefree spirit that defined the Roaring Twenties quickly evaporated, replaced by widespread hardship, anxiety, and uncertainty. Imagine the dance halls falling silent, the speakeasies losing their clientele as people struggled to make ends meet. The rebellious energy of the flapper gave way to the grim realities of poverty and unemployment. The cultural landscape also shifted dramatically. Imagine the focus moving away from jazz, consumerism, and social experimentation towards themes of survival, resilience, and social commentary. The art, literature, and music of the Depression era often reflected the hardship and social injustices of the time. The social tensions that had simmered beneath the surface of the Roaring Twenties were exacerbated by the economic crisis. Imagine the increased competition for scarce jobs, the rise in poverty and homelessness, and the growing frustration with the existing social and political order. The era of the new woman faced new challenges as economic hardship forced many women out of the workforce or back into more traditional roles. Imagine the debates about women taking jobs that could be filled by men during a time of mass unemployment. The Harlem Renaissance, while continuing to produce important works, also faced the economic realities of the Depression, with funding for the arts and cultural institutions drying up. Imagine the vibrant artistic community struggling to sustain itself amidst widespread poverty. Prohibition, already difficult to enforce, became even more problematic during the Depression. Imagine the argument that legalizing alcohol could create jobs and generate tax revenue, contributing to its eventual repeal in 1933. The Roaring Twenties, with its jazz, rebellion, and the dawn of modern America, was a unique and transformative decade. However, its end was as dramatic and impactful as its beginning. The stock market crash and the ensuing Great Depression served as a harsh reminder of the fragility of economic prosperity and ushered in a new era that would be defined by struggle, resilience, and the need for fundamental social and economic reform. The roar of the 20s faded into the silence of the 30s, leaving behind a changed nation grappling with unprecedented challenges.